All right, welcome to this third video in the series, and I'm going to show you a couple more things that go really well or kind of like hand in hand with the features that I show you in the previous videos with the thick skin and the custom brushes and all of that. So what I have here is essentially, let's see if I have it in a separate mesh, this one right here. So that's essentially what I have, this base mesh of this kind of like demon creature that I was working on, and I just took that mesh and I basically enabled thick skin, and with the custom brushes generated something that looks like the beginning of a real clay sketch before it is polished. So I'm going to show you how to create this sort of thing and have more control over the shapes and how to sharpen certain borders, like the ones that you can see here, so that it really feels like these are chunks of clay added into the base mesh. So let's go ahead and start with another really awesome addition to the features of 2021, ZBrush 2021.5. So I'm going to open up this stock palette here, and I'm going to bring in the render palette, right? And this render palette now has this preview AO, right? And the preview AO, when I enable it, is basically is going to allow me to see or visualize the ambient occlusion based on whatever changes that I make. So it is in real time. It changes in real time depending on the volumes, which is absolutely fantastic. So let's go to thick skin is disabled. So if I take something like the damp standard brush, let's filter by the letter D, and I go in an area like this, and I start pushing in, you'll see that these areas are going to get darker and darker, and that is because of the ambient occlusion. So this is great because very easily you can just enhance the look and feel of your object by just enabling this in the preview, and when you render, it's also going to be present, right? Obviously, maybe this is too much, and that's why you have those sliders here, so you can control the amount of ambient occlusion that you add. So the intensity, what I like to do is set it to 100 so I can clearly see what's going on. Maybe, in fact, it will be easier if I go to skin shade 4 for the time being, and I can actually see the effect of the ambient occlusion a lot easier, right? And then I can go ahead and play with the main radius and the second radius. So the main radius, you can see like the bigger shapes. Let's actually turn off the radius, second one, and we can just tweak the main one, sort of like the big shapes, right? So it's kind of like spreading. Just look at around the eyes and maybe this area here. And then the second radius is kind of like the cavities, or like trying to fine tune the cavities, which, they will be more clearly, more evident around this area. So look at the kind of like the bridge of the nose, right? So that's kind of like the secondary radius. But all of this is in real time and it's just a preview, right? But it's going to make it look a lot more realistic. I mean, even this one like this is kind of like a plaster type of material, I suppose. And with the blur, we just soften that a bit more. I wouldn't add too much blur, actually. So I like to work without blur, but again, I push the intensity to 100 so I can go back so that it's not as intense. And obviously it would be different depending on what type of material you're trying to emulate. I'm gonna go back to my clay one and just play around with this. But before and after, just by enabling, it just sort of sharpens everything that you can see in the viewport a lot more and makes it a lot more fun to play around with. All right, so that's another thing that's added into ZBrush. There's also a new render filter that is pretty cool. Hopefully I'll get to this in this video, but if not, I'll show you. I'll make another video about that. All right, so let's go ahead, and I'm going to jump into the base one that has no effect added to it. And I'm going to enable the thick skin, and I'm going to load my custom brush. Again, I explained in the first video how to do these brushes, and this is just the custom one based on the elastic brush or the notch brush. And I'm also going to enable symmetry just for the sake of making this a little bit faster. All right. I think this is good enough, maybe not as harsh. So I'm going to reduce the thickness a bit. Not that much. Something like 5. There we go. All right. So what I'll do is I'm going to start building up my my details like so with this brush. Um, and again, it's really easy and really fun. Like there's no like a hidden technique or anything. This is just a matter of taking any model that you want, enable thick skin, use a custom brush or not. You can, use any of the clay brushes really, and then just starting doing this to generate this effect. That's as simple as it gets. Obviously, in the other example that I show you, I spend a bit more time kind of like thinking about the directionality, because is one thing is to just go ahead and do this like I'm doing it, try to follow some of the main forms and follow kind of like the flow of the sculpture, than just going randomly and going in any direction, and that's just going to add noise but without any intentionality, which is um, I think it's pretty important to, even though you're trying to create something that seemed like random, it's important to create some sort of a sense of design that you're intentionally placing this, not just because it's possible to do it, but there's a reason to it. And the reason would be just simply emulating that effect of, if this is a real piece of clay, you will probably want to smudge or push things with your thumbs in a certain way, and that's what I'm trying to achieve here. But it's pretty simple. It's just a matter of taking the time of doing it, but you can do it in no time, like you see here. And you'll notice that I sort of avoided the midpoint or the center line, and that's just another neat trick that you can just work with symmetry for the sake of speed, to work a little bit faster, and then avoid touching the middle line, and then turn off symmetry, and then just without symmetry go over the center line again, and it will create that sense that it is an asymmetrical model, just because that center line is not symmetrical, even though the other details are. So that's another trick there that you can use, right? And then of course you can go over the model, but this took no time, right? And it looks pretty cool with the effect of this brush. And this is just one single brush. It's nothing special. It's something that you can also make yourself based on the notch brush. I'm gonna go ahead and load another brush. This is basically the same thing that I showed you in the previous video, where I took let me go to the stroke palette. I took the roll and enabled the roll, and I added 2.82 and using this alpha, but it is essentially the same thing. It's just creating those pieces of clay, right? Like that. But let's say that I want to do, I don't know, something more interesting here, and generate a bit more, a different value in terms of the main shapes. I will just do what I showed you in the previous video, holding control, masking this area like so, going to the subtool. I'm going to click on extract, accept, clear the mask. I covered this in the previous video, by the way. Dynamesh, maybe with a larger resolution, larger than that. And I'm going to also polish. And now we have another piece that I can take again with the thick skin, enable that, and start moving around, right? And I'm not too worried about the back facing or anything, because again, we're determining how much we can destroy this piece in a way based on the thickness. And now I can take something like the move brush, turn off the thick skin, and just blend this piece with the rest of the sculpt. And that's how I like to, produce variations in the thickness as well. And at the end of the day, right now, this is a different subtool, so you can see a slight difference in the coloration or in the tonal, or the tone, basically. But once you render, it should be pretty straightforward. And look at the ambient occlusion in between the subtools, right? That's pretty cool. All right, so that sort of covers what I showed you before in terms of the adding pieces and generating more complexity. And again, you can turn that into a macro. I just haven't I haven't done that. I keep saying that you could do it, but I'm pretty sure you can. It's just a series of very simple steps, and that will generate that. So let's go ahead and go back to the main head. I'm going to turn this off, clear the mask, just because I want to show you something else. Let's just add a couple more details. I have another brush here that should generate some more randomness here and a slightly more noisy stroke, I suppose. So you can see it's doing very similar effect to kind of like the smudges of the thumbs that I did before, but at the same time it's generating some more noise in the stroke. And that's also another thing that I'm looking for to variate this effect and make it a bit more convincing. But anyway, so let's say that we have something that we're happy with in terms of the placement of these details and how we use the thick skin to produce this, right? But I can use a couple of things to enhance the level of details. So I can use the technique that I showed you before with contrast in the previous video, but I can also, utilize that technique of contrasting things to only focus on certain areas. So let's go ahead and go to the morph target, right? So I'm going to use a very similar technique. I'm just going to target a different portion of the model. So I'm going to go to the formation as well. So again, this is something that I covered in the previous video. I'm going to store a morph target and I'm going to take the contrast all the way up. All right, so you see how much contrast we added. But maybe I don't want to have this overall everywhere, right? And I showed you in the previous video, you can take the morph target brush, right? The morph brush that works with the morph target, and you can just maybe make sure that thick skin is disabled now, and essentially go back to the previous state of the model, which is without the contrast, right? So you can just manually clean a little bit those things. But I actually like the sharpness of the different edges between the different pieces in a way, right? But I don't like to have that much contrast. So one thing I can do is mask by ambient occlusion or by cavity or whatever you want. But I think masking by ambient occlusion would work in this case. So in the masking palette, I can go ahead and click mask by ambient occlusion. Let's give it a second. This is depending on how much polygons and how much density you have in your model. This is a process that might take a little while. There we go. So now I have mask by ambient occlusion. It's a little bit hard to see. It's kind of like around the eyes, really. So might not work the same way that I was hoping. Let's turn off this occlusion and see. It kind of does. So yeah, let's see how it works. So you can use any type of masking. I mean, the cavity might be another good one, but the point of this process is that you can mask whatever you want using any of the techniques or any of the features in the masking palette, and then go to the morph target and use the slider. So instead of using the morph brush, I'm going to use the morph slider to go back to the previous state. But because we have some areas masked using these features, it's not going to be applied everywhere. Right? So it's a little bit hard to see, but it's happening around the eyes. So let's go back to morph, and instead let's exaggerate the effect. So I'm going to click on mask by cavity. Probably have to increase the intensity a bit, and maybe change the profile as well. So these are all tweaks that you can do to these masking tools. There we go. Right, so it's kind of like targeting some of those areas. Maybe, yeah, let's go for something more exaggerated. So you can use the mask cavity with this sort of curve like this, an intensity of 60, and you'll see that I'm targeting most of the areas except these edges that I want to preserve, right? So all I have to do now is invert that mask to keep those edges. So everything that is masked, everything that is darker in this case is going to be preserved. And we can go ahead and use the morph slider again to go back to what we had, right? But we are only removing or going back to the previous state based on what we have on mask. So I just use the morph slider for that. Now I can clear the mask, and now you'll see the effect is pretty convincing. It's kind of like there's some pieces that are left over between this and the previous state. So I can just go back in time just to show you the before and after, right? So this would be before. Let's do a quick screenshot here, holding Shift and S, and then let's go back in time, or forward in time actually. and you see the before and after. So it's pretty subtle, but again, it's all about the subtleties. So all of these noise and sharp edges that I created here compared to what I have in the original, that's all done with that technique. So just as a quick recap, all I did was I stored a morph target to save the original state of the model. Then I used the contrast, which is new in ZBrush 2021.5, and I add quite a bit of contrast. And then instead of using the morph brush, I masked certain areas and used the morph slider. So that's basically what this effect is. All right, so let's just turn on the ambient occlusion back, and that covers this additional technique that I found really useful when working with the thick skin. Now, there's one more thing that I want to show you in terms of rendering, and another really cool addition to a feature that has been in ZBrush for a while now, which is Sculptures Pro. So I'm going to leave that one for the next video, and I'm just going to cover a couple of really cool things using that, and I'm going to show you some of the new render filter that I think it goes really well with this type of sculptures. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.